Hi folks, and welcome back to Getting Started with Laravel 4. Now in the previous video we installed Laravel and had a brief look at the Laravel source code folder. Well, in this lesson we'll have a look at MVC and create our first controller and view. Now, like most modern PHP framework, Laravel follows the MVC pattern. MVC stands for Model, View, Controller. Now in procedural code, you often wind up with big files that contain the entire procedure. So that's connecting to a database, doing validation, maybe fetching a blog post, fetch the current user, writing chunks of HTML mixed with PHP code, and probably containing some convenience functions at the bottom to help out in all this. Soon your code becomes all muddy and a nightmare to maintain. Now in MVC you separate all these responsibilities into different classes, and each class has its own responsibility, and that way your code stays organized and maintainable. Now for those of you who don't know what MVC is, here's how that works in a nutshell. The idea behind MVC is that most applications are roughly about data and presentation. Now think of the model as a collection of files that do only data handling. Now, each model file handles a very specific task. If you need a certain blog post, just feed the blog post model with some parameters and it will hand you the data for that blog post in return. But you can also have a model that can, for instance, calculate age groups, or maybe one that can read Google Calendar XML files. You get the drill. Now the view, on the other hand, does presentation. Again, each view file can have a very specific task. Now you can, for instance, have a view that displays a menu, or one that wraps a blog article into HTML, or maybe one that binds them all together. Now that just leaves us with controllers. Well, these control the flow of the application. So if the user requests a blog post, the controller will tell the proper models to fetch and manipulate the necessary data, and then it hands that data to the proper view files for presentation. Now in Laravel, the entire application lives inside of the app folder. Your controllers go in the controllers folder, your models go into the models folder, and your views, of course, go into the views folder. Now we'll build our first controller and view in a minute, but first we need to create a route. So let's open up the routes file for that. It lives inside of the app folder and is called routes.php. Now this is where you set up all the routes for your application. Laravel uses explicit routing, which means that it only accepts routes that you have actually defined, and any other routes will throw an error. Do you remember that Laravel start page that we just saw? Well, that is actually this route here. I'll tell you what it does first, and then we can see if we can improve on that. Well, routes are defined by a Laravel class called route. We are using the get method to tell Laravel to listen to an HTTP GET request. If we wanted it to listen to a POST request, we do POST instead. Alternatively, we could do PUT and delete, and we can also listen to any HTTP request. But for now, let's just return it to GET. Now the first parameter is the URL. Now this is simply a /, and that means that we're listening to the root of our application. And the second parameter is the action that we want Laravel to take when we hit this route. Well, in this case, that's an anonymous function, and anything in here will be run. At the moment, we're creating a view. To do so, we use view make and then pass in the name of that view. Now that view is a response object, and we'll just return it so that Laravel can set the appropriate headers and echo the HTML to the screen. Now, while it is possible to set up your routes like this, it is considered bad practice. Because think about it, if your entire application logic is within your routes file, then that'd be precisely like using procedural code only inside of a routes file. See, you'd have to add all this business logic, and that would just be for a single page. Now think about what would happen if your application had 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 pages. Pretty soon, this file would become a bloated monstrosity and it would be a nightmare to maintain. So instead of routing to an anonymous function, we would like to route to a controller. But we need a controller first, of course. We'll just open up the controllers folder and check out the contents. You see we have two controllers here, a base controller and a home controller. Let's open up the home controller first. You see it's just a simple class called home controller, and that class name is exactly the same as the file name, only the file name has PHP as an extension, of course. Well, this is very important as Laravel needs these names to be the same in order to be able to load that controller at all. Now, as you can see, our home controller class extends the base controller class. And riddle me this, that lives in here. We'll check it out in a minute. Now, the home controller class has a single public function which is called show welcome. And guess what? That does exactly the same as we just saw in our routes file, namely return a view called hello. So the show welcome method in the home controller class is probably something that we would want to route to. Now let's have a look at that base controller. I'll just open up basecontroller.php, and now this extends controller, which is the main Laravel controller class. In Laravel, when you create a controller, it must always extend either the Laravel controller class, like here, or the base controller class, like here. So, how do you know which one to choose? Well, as a rule of thumb, if you have stuff that you want available in all controllers or in multiple controllers, then you can put that inside of your base controller. And now all the other controllers that extend base controller have this functionality available to them. Now, if you don't need that kind of shared functionality, you can also extend the controller class instead. Me, I usually extend the base controller since, well, you usually need some kind of global functionality at one point or another, and it's very easy to have a base controller handy to put that in. Okay, let's see if we can route to this home controller. Open up the routes file again, and here all we have to do is specify the controller class name, followed by an @ sign, followed by the appropriate controller method name. Alright, so now a GET request to the application root will call the home controller show welcome method. So if we fire up our browser, then if all goes well, nothing should have changed. And indeed, that page is still working. And let's just create one more together. I'll just copy this route. Okay, let's say we're not listening for the home page, but for a post page. Now we're going to create a post controller, and it's going to have a show method. Now if I currently run that in a browser, we will get an error. And that's because our class post controller doesn't exist yet. So let's create that. Inside of controller, we'll create a new PHP class called post controller. And now we'll just have that extend the base controller class, like so. So now what? Well, remember we specified a show method. Let's create that now. A public function called show. And let's have that return a view, shall we? So view make, and let's create that view in the post folder and call it show. Now you can use the slash notation here, but you can use a dot as well. Okay, so let's see where we are now. Well, the previous error is gone, but now we have Laravel complaining that it cannot find the view, which is of course true because we haven't created that. Let's go to the views folder and create a new folder called post. And inside of that folder, we'll create a file called show.php. And for now, let's just put a placeholder in there so we know that we'll be looking at the proper file. And sure enough, that's all there is to it. So we have our controller and we have our view, but now what's with that data that we would like our view to display? Well, we're not going to use models yet because I've got an entire lesson dedicated to them, but let's just pretend our model returned a blog post. Right, so in here I'll set a variable called post and I'll make that equal to a new standard class. And let's for now just set a title or something. So we'll do post title equals my post title. So now how do we get that post variable into our view? Well, like always with Laravel, just write it as you would say it. We want to make a certain view with a post variable, and let's just make that equal to post. And now inside of our view, let's just replace this with echo post title. So in our post controller, we created a post class and set a property of title to my post title. And in our show view, we'll just echo that post title. Now I think that should work. And sure enough, it does. Okay, so in retrospect, controllers control the application flow, but they do as little work as possible themselves. Data handling is done by models, and views wrap that data up into HTML, XML, or what have you. Now Laravel controllers extend the controller or base controller class, and views live inside of the views folder. In the next video, we'll have a closer look at Laravel routing, and I promise you, you will find it very versatile. Now I'll see you there.